Son of a Witch is a 1 to 4 player co-op roguelike game in which you play as one of several different characters, each with their own unique starting stats and starting gear. The basic gameplay loop is very simple. You proceed through different randomly generated stages, fighting enemies, collecting gold, weapons, items, pets, and power-ups. There are a few unlockable characters to be discovered along the way, but ultimately when you die, you start back at square one. The story is quite thin at this point. You are the son or daughter of a local witch who has been captured, and you are trying to rescue your mother. All the while, there are other subplots kind of running parallel with yours. There are light story elements scattered throughout the game, but you really don't need to know or interact with them in any meaningful way. The game is currently in early access and is relatively short at this point. There are only 5 acts, and each act plays out relatively quickly, but that is pretty on point for roguelike games. It is actively being developed, and as of this video, I have seen several updates since I began reviewing the game. The game is being sold for $19.99 on Steam. Son of a Witch is quite enjoyable, despite the fact I hate puns in game titles. The controls are quite solid, the graphics have their own charm to them, the item weapon system is quite complex. I enjoyed the game single player well enough, but really enjoyed the game multiplayer. It took only a few tries before my friends and I really understood the game, understood item distribution, planning for level approach, and the like. It's an easy game to pick up and play. Let's talk about the game's biggest strength, the items. Son of a Witch has a beautiful item weapon system. There are literally 100 different items that each have their own unique abilities, uses, and stats. There are different types of weapons that drastically change how you approach combat. For example, you might find a sword that drains life with each swing, making you play more aggressively. Or you might find a wand that lets you shoot from afar and also spawn food to heal your party, thus making you play more of a passive role. One of my favorite items is this voodoo doll that you can find. You curse an enemy with it and then throw it out of your inventory. Every time you attack this voodoo doll, it actually damages the enemy that's been cursed. It's a very unique mechanic, and it leads to some fun, interesting situations. Each item has a unique personality, and because of this, run-throughs are remembered based off of what loadout you had by the end. I still remember a specific run-through where I had a Hammer of Freezing, and I had consumed several potions which made my attack speed really high. There was nothing that I couldn't chain freeze, and thought surely I was going to make it all the way through this playthrough to the end. But I accidentally hit a shopkeeper, and their bodyguard came out and killed me really fast. And I remember not being frustrated at all. I remember smiling and laughing about the situation, and it was a very fun encounter. There are potions that have a variety of ranging effects and upgrades and curses. There's magic scrolls that can be stockpiled and used against hard bosses. There's keys to open chests and doors, runes to upgrade stats, bombs to access secrets, and much more. On top of this robust item and weapon system, the game mechanics of cycling through all of your equipment is actually very effective and well thought out as well. It may have taken me a little bit of time to wrap my mind around it, but once I had, I was able to swap through inventory and weave in and out of combat seamlessly. The combat and gameplay are also very polished. I have never run into any frustrating moments while playing, no bugs, no unfair encounters. The combat is deceptively good, and each enemy has their own unique abilities, equipment, and patterns. The more you play, the better you understand the threats, and the more confidence you get. You feel like you're getting better at the game with each playthrough. Son of a Witch is a good game, but it isn't without its flaws. The sound design is weak, the music is kind of repetitive and dull. There are some strange audio effects that seem overly too loud or sound like they were recorded on a home microphone. Says the guy recording on a home microphone. The art assets don't really have a consistent style either. They have their own charm, but you can tell the characters and the enemies look very different from the painterly background that they're set upon. There are some games that purposely try to do this, and it works because they've designed that with consistency, but it doesn't really work that well in Son of a Witch. The AI isn't the best nor the brightest. It basically boils down to follow the player and attack. This leads to being able to kite enemies and lure them into deadly traps, and despite the poor audio and inconsistent art style and poor AI, I still think Son of a Witch is super fun. These do not detract to the point that I still can't find enjoyment from the actual gameplay. Son of a Witch is a good game, but it isn't necessarily a revolutionary game. Besides a brilliant item system, there isn't a lot of unique or creative game mechanics involved. It's pretty typical of these types of games. It's expensive as well, and so I would recommend this game, but the price tag gives me hesitation and pause. I don't necessarily particularly like looking at price when doing game reviews, but the price is $20 almost, and for this type of game, it doesn't seem to fit. So yes, I would recommend this game, but with a caveat. Look at the price and see if it is within your range of this type of game. For the study, I want to look at Son of a Witch's biggest accomplishment, namely the unique and well fleshed out item system. There are 4 areas that make the item system so great, and I think a lot of games could benefit from looking at this. First, the items are useful, and there's not just a lot of them. They're all useful. Second, the uniqueness of each item and the interesting effects they have. Third, the flexibility of the items and the weapons. And fourth, and finally, the personality each item has. So each item in the game is useful in its own right. Even the weapons or items that appear to be weak can be used cleverly to achieve great outcomes. Though it is true I'd rather have a more powerful throwing hammer over the Goblin Sword. The Goblin Sword, for example, is common and can be used while trying to get the possession of more powerful items. Also, if combined with other items and abilities, this weak Goblin Sword can actually prove very powerful in the correct hands. It has a high attack speed, which makes it lethal against slower enemies, whose attacks you might be able to interrupt. This is just one of 100 examples of the usefulness of different items, and when taken as a whole, make every item dropped interesting. It is true you will pass up several items as you explore each stage, but every skipped item is calculated. There's a decision-making process that goes into it, and this is satisfying to the player. There's also random effects for some items, which lead to risky choices, which is also enjoyable to the player. The majority of magic potions, for example, have beneficial effects, but you never know what these might actually do until you spend money to identify them or risk the effect by just drinking it. This randomness doesn't disrupt the strategy of each run, but rather adds yet another layer of choice. This is extremely gratifying as a player to manage risk and reward in an intelligent manner, and is only possible because of the creative and unique design space the potions have and their effect. I'm more likely to get a potion that makes me faster than a potion that makes me slower, but do I drink the unknown potion immediately or wait until the direst of situations? Beside being useful, every item is also very unique. There are very few items that are simply stat changes, and the ones that are simply stat shifted still feel significantly different because the stats which are different actually matter. There are clever abilities associated with every weapon and unique modifiers for the different pets, scrolls, rings, and potions you find. To give you a sense of what I mean by uniqueness, there's a staff that bounces health from all the players in the room. This particular staff also takes health away from enemies and NPCs. So if I use this staff against the boss, it can quickly level the playing field by raising the hero's health while lowering the boss's total HP. If used in a shop, it actually will trigger the guard to come out because it lowered the NPC's health, thus making them think you're trying to steal from them. This fun interaction keeps you on your feet, gives you a variety of different ways to use the staff, and this is just one out of many examples. For example, there's a hammer that you throw and it returns back to you, a vampiric sword, a staff that summons healing food, a bow and arrow that fires a slow but powerful spread shot, a pet that will stun enemies, a pet that will pick up items from unreachable positions, scrolls that will teleport you to a random room in the dungeon, potions that make collecting gold heal you, etc., etc., etc. There are so many unique items. I have already spoken in part about the utility of the different items and what this utility adds to the game, but I want to speak about the player's skill level and how this utility affects that. If every weapon is only useful in one specific set of circumstances, then the player can't get better. The player will discover when to do X and when to avoid Y. Thus, they're done improving. But with Son of a Witch's deep item system, the learning curve never feels like it's truly over. As silly as a comparison as this might sound, it feels a lot like Rocket League, easy to learn but hard to master. An example of this is, I was starting with the Starring Sword. I would always try and ditch the Starring Sword as quickly as possible in favor of a more powerful weapon. But one particular run, I didn't find any replacement item and had to use the sword against the boss. When I used the sword special attack, I realized it stunned the boss for quite some time while also dealing a lot of damage. This was not an arbitrary thing. This was game-changing. Such an outwardly simple skill dealt massive damage, stunned the boss, and gave myself and teammates the ability to fight the boss in a completely different way. Now what I do is I actually keep the Starring Sword for as long as I can and switch between it and a more powerful weapon, so I take up a weapon slot. And when I need to stun the boss, I just switch to the Starring Sword and stun the boss. This leads to a lot of enjoyable situations as well that make you feel like you're planning and making choices that matter. The final point I want to look at is that of personality. The last few months, as I've been reviewing videos, I've played a lot of indie games and AAA games. Besides solid game mechanics and the like, the number one key feature I find that makes a game enjoyable is personality. Assuming the game mechanics are not broken, if a game has personality, I usually like it. When I say personality, I mean some characteristic that makes it stand out in my mind. Dry toast has no personality, but toast with apricot jelly, on the other hand, is memorable. And depending if you like apricot jelly or not, it's enjoyable. The items in Son of a Witch all have personality. They all play differently, and it makes me like the game. Anyone making a game, whether it be a puzzle, first-person shooter about vampire chess players, or a generic RTS strategy game. I just said RTS strategy. Don't say that. RTS game. Please, inject personality into your game. If you're currently designing a game, look at the game and try and find at least 5 different points that you could put personality into it. It makes such a difference, and it makes the game enjoyable. So that is the last thing I learned from Son of a Witch. Despite its few shortcomings, its weapon and item system are oozing with personality.